Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Thank you so much for coming. My name is Amy Draves, and I'm thrilled to welcome Gretchen Rubin to the Microsoft Research Visiting Speaker Series. She's here to discuss her latest book, Better Than Before, in which she brings a provocative yet practical perspective to habits. Gretchen is one of the most influential writers and bloggers on the topics of habits, happiness, and human nature. She started her career in law and was clerking for Justice Sandra Day O'Connor when she realized that she really wanted to be a writer instead. So she's since authored several books, including the New York Times bestsellers Happier at Home and The Happiness Project. Please join me in giving her a very warm welcome.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here today. I love Seattle, so I'm very excited to be here. So I'm going to talk for a few minutes about habits and why I was drawn to the subject of habits. And then I'm going to throw out some things that surprised me about habits when I was doing my research so that you can use it if you want to shape your own habits, or what's much more fun, try to shape somebody else's habit. And then at the end, we'll have time for question and answers, which is always my favorite part. So please be thinking of your questions. I got the idea to study habits because for years I'd been researching and writing and talking to people about the subject of happiness. And I began to notice a pattern, which was when I talked to people about a big happiness challenge they were facing, it was very often something that at its core was a problem with a habit. So somebody would say to me, well, I'm exhausted all the time. Well, that's really about the habit of getting enough sleep. Or somebody would say, well, I want to write a novel in my free time. And that's about the habit of making consistent progress. So I became more and more drawn to the role that habits could play in helping us be happier, healthier, and more productive. And then I went to lunch with a friend, and she said something that got me obsessed with habits. She said to me, well, I have to say I'm a little bit of a habits bore. I'm constantly quizzing people about their habits. And she said to me, well, I would love to have the habit of exercise. I know that would make me happier. And here's the thing. When I was in high school, I was on the track team. I never missed track practice, but I can't go running now. Why? And I thought, well, why? It's the same person, same behavior. At one time it was effortless, now she can't do it. What is going on? And I became determined to solve the puzzle of habits. And as I got into it, I became more and more curious about subjects that no one ever seemed to talk about. Like, it's maybe easy to understand why we have trouble forming the habit of something we don't like to do. But why is it that people just as often complain about not being able to form the habit of something they love to do? Why is it that we're so unmoved by the consequences of our bad habits? Research suggests that up to 50% of American adults do not take prescription medication for a chronic health condition. Why is it that habits sometimes form overnight? Sometimes they vanish just as abruptly. So I became determined to figure all this out. But there were three questions that I felt I had to tackle before I really got into it. And I'm sure you've thought about these questions yourself, if you've thought about your own habits. And one is, why even bother thinking about habits? I mean, we've all got a lot to do. Why worry about your habits? Well, it turns out that habits are like the invisible architecture of everyday life. Studies suggest that about 40% of everyday existence is shaped by our habits. If we have habits that work for us, we're much more likely to be happier, healthier, and more productive. If we change our habits, we change our lives. So what is a habit anyway? And a lot of times the habit, when you read about habits, there's a focus on repetition, frequency, the familiarity of cues around a habit. But I have really come to believe that the key aspect about a habit is decision making, or really the lack of decision making. Habits are freeing and energizing because they get us out of the draining, difficult business of making decisions and using our self-control. I do not decide to get up at 6 a.m. I do not decide to skip dessert. I made those decisions long ago. This is my habit. That behavior is on automatic pilot. It takes nothing from me. Now, when I tell people I'm writing about habits, a lot of times they say, well, that's important because I want to go through my day making healthy choices. And I'm like, no, you don't. Because every time you make a healthy choice, you have the opportunity to make the wrong choice. Choose once and then stop choosing. make it a habit, and then you don't have to make decisions. You don't have to use your self-control. So then the question is, okay, well, how do you change a habit? And there is no shortage of expert advice, right? Do it first thing in the morning. Start small. Give yourself a cheat day. Do it for 30 days. All of these work for some people, sometimes, but they don't work for everybody all the time. And what I found is that there are 21 different strategies that we can use to make or break our habits. And sometimes people get kind of terrified when I tell them they're 21. It's too many, give me 3. But it's actually good to have 21 because it means there's a whole menu from which to choose. Some of these work for some people and not others. Some of these are available to us at some times in our lives, but not at other times. So there's a lot to choose from. But the most important thing, the crucial step that I think so many people skip to their detriment, is that we have to begin by thinking about ourselves. What is true about you? If you want to change your habit, how are you going to do it in the way that's right for you? Because just because it works for somebody else to do it a certain way doesn't mean it's going to work for you. And I think a lot of times when people fail, when they accuse themselves of being lazy or lacking self-control, it's because they've tried to form a habit that was never right for them in the first place. For instance, morning people and night people. This is a real thing. I'm a morning person, and I used to think everybody could be a morning person if they would just go to sleep on time. No. It's genetically determined to a large degree, and it's also a function of age. There is a real difference between morning people and night people. And I have a friend who is a hardcore night person. He's barely can get to work on time in the morning. He's at his most, energetic and creative and productive much later in the day. And he looked me in the eye and said, "This year, my New Year's resolution is to get up early every day and go for a run." And I said, "Have you met yourself? Because this is not going to work for you. It might work for me because I'm a morning person. But for you, that is not the right way to set it up. There's a better habit strategy for you that's going to take into account what's true for you." Okay, how many people here are morning people? How many people here are night people? Right? It's a real thing. So set it up in the way that's right for you. So now I'm going to talk about some strategies to think about as you're thinking about yourself and as you're thinking about how you can set up your habits for success. And again, these are things that surprise me. Strategy of monitoring. You all know about the strategy of monitoring. If you monitor behavior, you're much likely to do a better job. We don't have to talk about that. Get your Fitbit, use your app to budget, to keep track of your spending. It's powerful, it's effective, but it's familiar. But here's something that surprised me, and that is the strategy of abstaining. And this is a strategy that works extremely well for some people and does not work at all for other people. You must figure out if you are an abstainer or a moderator. So abstainers are people like me. And I realized I was an abstainer when I was reading something by the 18th century essayist Samuel Johnson, one of my favorite writers. And Samuel Johnson goes to a party, and someone asks him if he would take a little wine. And Johnson says, "I can't take a little. Abstinence is as easy to me as temperance would be difficult." Meaning, I can have none, but I can't have a little. And when I read that, I thought, that is me. I can have no cookies, or I can have 7 cookies. I can't have 1 cookie. I have never had half a dish of ice cream in my life. And the thing about abstainers, and this has to do with a strong temptation, when you're facing a strong temptation. Abstainers are like all or nothing people. We find it pretty easy to have none. But once we start, we're going to go all the way. But we find it pretty easy not to have any. Now, moderators, by contrast, get kind of panicky and rebellious if they're told they can never have something. They do better when they have a little bit, or when they have it sometimes. And when I understood the difference between moderators and abstainers, a mystery that had plagued me my entire life became clear, which is, what is up with those people that keep the bar of fine chocolate in their desk drawer at work, and once a day they have 1 square of fine chocolate? Because if it were me, my entire day would be consumed with, now later, 2, 3, it's my birthday, it's raining, The whole day would be about that candy bar until it was gone, because I'm an abstainer. But for a moderator, that's what they like to do. So who here thinks they're an abstainer? And who here thinks they're a moderator? So here you see the seeds of many a marital fight and an office conflict. Because one person walks in with a giant box of donuts, the other person said, why didn't you bring in the donuts? You know I'm going to eat the whole box today. And the other person says, you just need to learn how to manage yourself better. And hijinks ensue. It's not that one person's right and one person's wrong. It's just that there are different ways of fighting strong temptation. And this isn't just about food. It often comes up with technology. You know, it's like my sister, she said Candy Crush was actually affecting her career. I know a guy who said that it took him an extra year to write his PhD thesis because of World of Warcraft. Sometimes you can't have a little bit. It's easier to have none. So it's just good to know yourself and which strategy works for you, and to accept the fact that just because something works for you doesn't mean that it's the right strategy for someone else. And this sort of related, but much more fun, is the strategy of treats. This is definitely the most fun strategy of all the strategies of habit change. So treats energize us. When we give ourselves treats, we feel energized, we feel cared for, we feel taken care of. We're like cell phones that need to get a charge. And a treat is not the same thing as a reward. A reward is something that you have to earn or justify. A treat is something that you get just because you want it. And treats are important because when we give ourselves treats, our self-command rises. And if there's one thing that we all want, it's a lot of self-command, especially when we're trying to keep our good habits. And research shows this. When they would give people a little treat, either in the form of a little gift or having them watch a funny video, people's self-command rose. And so you want to have a lot of ideas for how to give yourself healthy treats, so that if you're in that mode when you're thinking, I need it, I want it, I've got to have it, you reach for something healthy. And some people can't really think easily of what their treats would be. So you want to be thinking about what you could do. So I know a guy who, he doesn't even like camping, but he loves the stuff. So he'll go to a camping store and just like look around. That's for him as a treat. I have a friend who has to get her whole family out the door in the morning. And so she gets dressed, she gets everybody out the door, and then she gets back into bed fully dressed. And she says, it's the best part of my day. And it could be playing with your dog. I have a podcast now with my sister. I'm Happy with Gretchen Rubin, and a lot of people say they use podcasts to give themselves a little treat. Buying yourself new music, whatever it might be, so that when you feel like you need that jolt of energy, you have it. But you want to give yourself healthy treats, because unhealthy treats are very attractive. And you don't want to do something to make yourself feel better that in the end just makes you feel worse. And what are the three big areas of unhealthy treats? I think you know: food and drink, shopping, and screen time. For some people, these can be healthy treats. For many people, they're better avoid them because they can quickly become unhealthy treats. But so treats matter because when we give more to ourselves, we can ask more from ourselves. Now, this next thing that surprised me, I have to say it was so surprising to me. It was so opposite of what I expected to see that for a long time I was sort of denying my observation of the world because I couldn't make sense of it. And what was really weird was that I kept hearing the same exact story from different people. I mean, same exact story, like as if they were all getting the same message beamed into their brains from the CIA, because it was practically verbatim. And most memorably, and the thing where I really decided I had to figure out what was going on, was I was at my college reunion. And I am a habits bore, and I will ask everybody about their habits. So I was talking to my friend Brad about his habits. And Brad told me the story, which was like the 10th time that I had heard this identical story. And Brad said, I wanted to get in the habit of exercise. I wanted to get back into the habit of running. So I decided to train for the marathon. And I ran the marathon. And I loved training for the marathon. And I had a great time running the marathon. And then I took off those rest days that they tell you to take after you run the marathon. And I haven't run since. And I had heard this from many people, specifically about the marathon. And then I thought, well, and there are other examples of this. Oh, I gave up sugar for Lent, and I thought, this is great. I finally quit sugar. Now I eat more sugar than ever. Oh, my friends and I did a 30-day yoga challenge, and I thought, this is amazing. I'm doing so much yoga. Now I don't do any yoga. See, this didn't make sense to me, because what I would have said, what I would have predicted, would have been that these kind of accomplishments, hitting a goal like this, is going to energize somebody. It's going to make them feel positive. It's going to make them feel more attached to the habit. It's going to make that habit solidify. But that's not what I was seeing. it seemed like it was having the opposite effect. It wasn't helping. It was actually seeming to cut off the habit, which didn't, I like, what was up with that? And then I finally realized what it was. It's that these people were hitting a goal. They had crossed a finish line. The marathon, the 30-day yoga challenge, Lent. And what happens when you cross a finish line? You're finished. It's over. And then if you want to do that again, you have to start over. And starting over is often much harder than starting. And that the finish line was kicking people into a feeling of that it was over. They had been aiming for it, and now they were off the hook. And the thing about setting a goal is a great way to reach a goal. But with habits, it's often not about hitting a goal. It's about doing something indefinitely. Now, don't think about that, because that can scare people when they think about like indefinitely. So just let that be a misty haze. But it's not about running the marathon. It's about exercising forever. It's not about quitting sugar for Lent. It's about eating more healthfully forever. And so it's much better in habits not to be thinking of finish lines, but to be thinking of milestones. It's an exciting milestone to run the marathon, but that is just one of many milestones that you will pass in your lifetime of exercise. And I think this is one of the reasons why successful dieters often end up failing. Because typically what happens when we go on a diet, we say, okay, I weigh 160 pounds. My goal is to weigh 140 pounds. Oh, I lost my goal weight of 20 pounds. Now I can go back to eating normally. And what happens when you eat normally? You go right back to 160, and maybe you even blow by it. It's not about hitting that goal. It's about just passing the milestone. And this one I'll talk about very briefly, because it's just weird. I've been thinking about it for years, because it came up in happiness, and I still kind of can't figure it out. But it's true. It's true for me, and it seems to be true for a lot of people, which is the weird degree to which, for most people, outer order contributes to inner calm. Inner calm, inner self-command, a sense of energy, a sense of optimism. It is clearly trivial if you've got an overflowing coat closet, or your in basket is stuffed with paper. And yet over and over, people tell me that when they get control of their stuff, of the stuff of life, they feel more in control of their lives generally. If it's an illusion, it's a helpful illusion. And I had a friend who said to me, last night I cleaned out my fridge, and now I know I can switch careers. And I knew exactly what that felt like. It is just weird. And of all the habits that people say that they've changed, that have specifically made them feel happier, healthier, and more productive. And I'm not saying this is the biggest change that you could make in your life, the most significant change, but it does seem to be the thing that people like most often specifically mention, is the habit of making your bed. There's something about this little habit that makes people happier. How many people here regularly make their bed? How many people here regularly make their bed in a hotel room on the morning they check out? Yes, we will talk later. There's something about this little habit. So think about making your bed. And here's another kind of, because maintaining order is really hard. There's constantly that scum on the surface of life that we have to fight. And here's a good habit for your consideration. The 1-minute rule. Anything that you can do in less than a minute, do without delay. If you can hang up your coat, if you can print a document and file it, if you can scan something and throw it away, if you can put your coffee mug in the sink, this keeps all that stuff from just accumulating. It's trivial on its own, but it can make us feel weighed down. And when you get rid of that stuff, it's just weird how often people say that they just feel freer, and it just more full of possibility. And the last thing that I'm going to talk about, I have to say, of everything in my entire life that I have ever, any intellectual challenge that I have ever faced, this was the biggest intellectual challenge that I struggled with. And it almost, like I could feel the smoke pouring out of my ears at certain points when I was trying to understand this. And this is this personality framework, which I saw through the lens of habits, but then I realized it's actually much bigger than habits, which I call the Four Tendencies. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain the Four Tendencies, and then I'm going to go through, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand, because I'll be very curious to see who's here, where you are in the Four Tendencies. And then I'll go back and make some observations about the Four Tendencies, so you can think about how you might use your knowledge of your tendency to manage yourself better, or how to get along better with other people. But before I start, I want to make a few notes. First of all, it sounds really boring when I start, but I promise it gets juicy, so stay with me. And the other thing is that sometimes I get the feeling that people are trying to figure out what is the best tendency and kind of shove themselves in their category. But this is, like anything having to do with self-knowledge, it's only helpful if you're honest with yourself. All of these include all categories include people who are very, very successful and also big, big losers. So, be honest. So here we go. The 4 tendencies. Well, they say there are 2 kinds of people, the kind of people who like to divide people into 2 kinds of people and the kind of people who don't. I definitely am the kind who does. So you're going to hear it right now. So this has to do with whether you are an upholder, a questioner, an obliger, or a rebel. And what's different is how do you respond to an expectation? So there are outer expectations, like a work deadline or request from a sweetheart. And there are inner expectations, like your own desire to keep a New Year's resolution, your own desire to get back into practicing guitar. So upholders readily meet outer and inner expectations alike. They meet a work deadline, they keep a New Year's resolution without much fuss. They really want to meet others' expectations from them, but their expectations for themselves are just as important or more important. Next, questioners. Questioners question all expectations. They will do it if they agree that it makes sense. They hate anything arbitrary or inefficient. They are very interested in explanations. So in a sense, they make everything into an inner expectation because they'll do it only if they endorse it. Next, obligers. Obligers readily meet outer expectations, but they struggle to meet inner expectations. And this explains the mystery of my friend on the track team. When she had a team and a coach waiting for her, she had no trouble showing up. But when it was just herself, her own expectation that she was going running, it was much harder for her. Finally, rebels. Rebels resist all expectations, outer and inner alike. If you ask or tell them to do something, they are very likely to resist. They want to do their own work in their own way, in their own time. And they don't even like to tell themselves what to do. Like, take a class at 10 a.m. on Saturday. No. OK, so those are the 4 categories. So now I'm going to ask you to raise your hand. First, upholders. Readily meet outer and inner alike. My hand's up because I'm an upholder. OK. Next, questioners. Questioners question all expectations. They'll do something if they think it makes sense. Next, obligers. Obligers readily meet outer, struggle to meet inner. Finally, rebels. Rebels resist all, outer and inner alike. OK, interesting. OK. And who here feels like they did? Oh, by the way, if you're thinking to yourself, I question the validity of this framework, that's a good sign that you're a questioner. And who here feel like they did not find themselves in this framework at all? Okay, pretty good. OK, so what we saw here is very, very typical. Overall, rebel is a tiny tendency. Very few people are rebels. It's a conspicuous tendency, but it's tiny. What came as a shock to me was to realize that my tendency, upholder tendency, is also tiny. Very few people are upholders. And this came as a huge shock to me as I was writing my book, and I basically had to rewrite the book when I realized, I went into it thinking that I was very typical, and it turns out I'm on the freaky fringe, which, by the way, came as a shock to no one except me, that I have an extreme personality. But I did not realize that. It turns out very few people are upholders. So rebels and upholders are the 2 extreme personalities. They're small. Overwhelmingly, people are questioners and obligers. Overwhelmingly. Now, this room, it's interesting. I can never really tell. I think obliger is the biggest tendency. In this room, we had more questioners. But we had a lot of obligers, too. So those are the big ones. And that has a lot of implications for anyone designing products or devices or doctors or anyone trying to get people to do things. You've got to remember that a lot of people that you're going to try to convince need that they need to be reached through their questioner tendency or their obliger tendency. So what are some things to observe generally about the tendencies and some things that maybe you can be thinking about as you're thinking about people at work, people at home, friends, like whenever you're trying to get along with other people, what can you take into account? So first of all, the tendencies, I believe, are hardwired. They are a pervasive aspect of your personality. You're not one thing at one time of your life and something at another time of your life, though it can often be difficult to tell what a child is. By the time we're adults, I think that is what you are. It doesn't change in context. They're not tied to gender. They're not tied to birth order or religious upbringing. This is part of the hardwired aspect of your personality. And people often say, well, can you change your tendency? And the fact is, I think with wisdom and experience, you can learn how to harness the strengths of your tendency and offset the negative parts of your tendency. But I don't think you really can change your tendency, except for like the rare, every once in a while, I don't know about you, but very few times I have met somebody who truly has been changed. They are not the person that they once were. Either they had like a catastrophic health challenge, or they went through a period of addiction, or something fundamentally changed them. Other than that, I think your tendency is what it is. And rather than worry about changing your tendency, which is what some people want to do, it's better to think about how to bring about the circumstances that are going to allow you to thrive. So let me make a few observations about the different tendencies, because they all have sort of their own striking patterns. Upholders, they're great. They're self-starters. They get things done. So they're kind of easy to have around, except that they can be very hard on other people because they don't have a lot of empathy for why other people might have trouble following through for things. They can be kind of cold and kind of judgmental because they kind of get their own thing going. They got to take care of themselves. They put a high value on things like self-command and execution. And, it's like, yeah, I know you want me to help you proofread that report, but I got my own report. Or, yeah, you want me to help you with your homework, but I got to go for my daily run. I have a friend, one of my law school roommates, she's even more of an upholder than I am. And she told me that, like, in last year, she'd not gone to the gym like 5 times, which to me, I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. Other people are like, that is sick. That's crazy. So that's very upholder. Like, you're sticking to your things and you're going to follow through. Questioners. Now, and there's a lot of questioners in the room, so I'm going to talk a little bit at greater length about questioners. So one of the things about questioners can be terrific to have around because they are very healthy for organizations because they're the ones saying, like, why are we doing it by Friday? Why are we using this software? Why are we hiring this firm? Why are we doing this at all? Why am I listening to you? Yeah, and that's really good. They're keeping people from wasting their time. They're super interested in efficiency. They love data. Excel spreadsheets, often like very associated with questioners. And so that can be really healthy to have around. However, questioners can also drain other people and organizations because they're constant questioning. If a team has decided that a question has been asked and answered and the questioner will not let it go, then everybody else can get very exasperated by that. Also, like sometimes their questioning can seem to be undermining or uncooperative or not showing a team spirit. So for instance, a questioner who's in a classroom who's questioning a teacher or a boss who's being questioned might feel like their authority is being undermined, or they might feel like that person is not showing respect. Where the questioner is like, it's not that I just want to understand, like, why are we doing this? But sometimes it can come across in a bad way. And this is a place where more socially adept questioners are good at framing things like, yeah, I don't see why we're going this way. So help me understand it so I can do a better job executing. Instead of being like, that doesn't make any sense. Why are you doing it that way? Which sometimes questioners are often really annoyed by the stupidity of the world. And here's a weird thing about questioners. They often have trouble with traffic regulations. This comes up over and over and over again when I talk to questioners. They're like, it's totally arbitrary that we're all supposed to drive the same speed limit. Like, what is up with that? I'm not going to abide by that law. I'm like, well, good luck with that. But so the arbitrariness of something like that really bothers them. Now, some questioners are very decisive, but some can they will complain of analysis paralysis. They love information, and so they want to have more and more information. They can get very caught up in that because it's so fulfilling to them. And sometimes they don't like to make decisions unless they have perfect information, which sometimes you don't have the luxury of waiting or even having perfect information available to you. And so if you are a questioner like that, you feel like you're draining yourself or other people, or you're managing someone like that, it can be very helpful to say something like, well, we need a decision by Friday. By Friday, I have to have your best judgment. Or we're going to interview 5 people, but not 15 people. To put a limit on it so that there isn't this endless spin. I mean, my good friend of mine is a questioner, and she's married to a questioner, and she said, we needed to get a new dishwasher, and it took 2 years, because every time it was like, well, what's the best dishwasher? Well, we're going to get the dishwasher. Do we need to get a new countertop? Well, we're going to do the kitchen. Like, should we do the roof? And, and she's like, and then finally she's like, we're going to get a new dishwasher by Friday. Best offer, that we've just got to act, because they were spinning into analysis paralysis. Then obligors. So obligors, they readily meet outer but struggle to meet inner. So obligors are the rock of the world, because they are the ones that will come through, but they struggle to do things for themselves. And I will say that of all the tendencies, obligors are the ones that are the most likely to say that they do not like aspects of their tendency, because they get very frustrated by the fact that they see themselves meeting the expectations of others, but they're unable to meet the expectations of themselves. And I think often they misunderstand the dynamic. Often an obliger might think that what's going on is, I have low self-esteem, or I can't make myself a priority, or others are constantly interfering with my ability to do the things I want to do. But here's the thing. If you are an obliger, or you are working with an obliger, or living with an obliger, which you certainly are, because it's a very large tendency, the answer, the secret, the way to get an obliger to meet an inner expectation is to put an external expectation on it. It's all about accountability. When there is accountability, external accountability, the obligers can do whatever it is. This is the answer. So for my friend on the track team, if I knew then what I knew now, I would say, run with a friend, run with your dog, sign up with a trainer, take a class where they take attendance, or some obligers feel accountable if they pay for things, some don't. That's an important thing to know about yourself. Like, does that matter? If she's very cheap, so I bet she would really care if she paid, and she would show up if she paid. Find a way to have the external accountability. And I have loved hearing from obligers about the creative ways that they have figured out ways to give themselves external accountability for their inner expectations. Okay, so 2 of my favorite examples. One was a woman who lived by herself, and she wanted to get up earlier. So you're like, well, how would you create external accountability for getting up earlier if you're live by yourself? So what she did is she went onto the social media management platform Hootsuite, and she set up a very embarrassing Facebook post to post every morning at 8:15 a.m. unless she gets up to disable it. I talked to 2 guys, and when they work out, they swap shoes. So if you don't come tomorrow, then I can't work out because you've got my shoe, right? So there are all these ways to build in external accountability once an obliger realizes that that is what the necessary piece is. Here's another very striking pattern about obligers. Obligers will meet expectations, and then suddenly they will snap and they will refuse, and obliger rebellion, where they will refuse to do something. Now, this can be small and symbolic. It can also be explosive and destructive. And this is very important to try not to allow obligers to get into that place of deep burnout and resentment, because it can be very destructive. So, for instance, in the workplace, this often comes up. Obligers are very valuable team members often, because they are meeting external expectations, and if somebody else asks them to help out, they will. But then they feel exploited and taken advantage of. And by the way, they are, because who does an upholder, a questioner, a rebel go to for help? Go to the obliger. And so then they get overloaded, and they're just like, I'm out of here. And over, I've heard from obligers who are like, you know what? I didn't say a word. I decided I had enough. I walked out the door, and they wanted to have the conversation about what do we need to offer you to get you to stay? And I won't. I just had enough. So we always want to be looking for ways to keep obligers from getting into that deep burnout or being taken advantage of and exploited by others like ourselves, so they don't fall into obliger rebellion. And then finally, rebels, and then we'll go to questions, my favorite part. So rebels resist all expectations, outer and inner alike. They want to act from freedom and choice. They want to express their authentic self at all times. And if you are working with a rebel, you want to be very careful that you don't accidentally trip their feelings of resistance. And this is very easy to do, because you could do something like, hey, read this book. You'll love it. They're going to be like, no, I'm not going to read it. I hate it. Because you're telling me what to do. Oh, this is so great. You're following the doctor's orders. He can't tell me what to do. And in fact, I had a friend who she has a rebel father, so they go to the doctor, and The doctor is like, Mr. So-and-so, you absolutely have to take your medication. You better follow my orders because if you don't do this, you're going to fall into a high-risk group and blah, 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 blah. So they go out on the street, on the sidewalk. He turns to her and says, what do you think? Should I take the medicine? And she said, no. Why would you bother? And he said, what, you want me to die? And he takes it. Always making the choice. And so if you're working with a rebel, like say a rebel child, or you've got a rebel team member, it's things like, wow, it would really make everybody's life easier if we could get this project done before spring break. That's just information. And the rebel can act on it or not. They can choose a rebel child, to say to a rebel child, well, to have your choice of colleges, a person has to have good SAT scores. That's just information. Act on it with your will. Because they will often rise to a challenge. They want to do things often that are going to make them successful or loving or considerate. But it needs to come from a place of choice. Not duty, not obligation, not what's polite, not what you said you did, not what everybody expects you to do, not because I said so, because they're choosing. But they can do anything that they choose to do. And that is very powerful. So the last thing I would say, and then we'll have questions, is just I really do think that it's worth taking the time to think about your habits because they are so pervasive, they are so powerful, they are so freeing. And when we change our habits, we can change our lives. So thank you. Now you get a gold star if you ask the first question because nobody likes to be first. Oh, and I believe you were a rebel. Were you a rebel? Okay, so rebels always want to sit in the front or the back. I don't know what's up with that. Are you a rebel too? See, front and back. How crazy is that? Okay.
So you spoke about the 4 types. Can these types be situational? Like, for example, can I be a rebel with my wife, but I'm obliging with my manager, or vice versa, something like that?
So the question is it dependent on context, like you're one in one context and one in the other? And I really don't think so. Because often when people think that they're a mix, really they're not. So if you say something like, I'm an upholder at work, but I'm a rebel with myself, that's the definition of an obliger, right? I'm meeting external expectations like at work, but when I'm trying to get myself to do something, I don't do it. So that's actually sort of the definition of an obliger. Or I spoke at a high school and I talked to a guy who said, well, I'm a mix because when I'm talking to, I have a teacher that I like and I respect, and that teacher gives me homework, I'll do it, like an upholder. But if I don't like the teacher, I won't do it, like a rebel. And I was like, no, that's questioner, because the questioner's first question is, why am I listening to you? If you don't have my trust, if I don't have respect for your authority, I'm not going to do it. And so that's very questioner. So I think often we look like a mix, depending on situation, but it's actually the same tendency, just showing its face in a different way because it's a different circumstance. Yeah.
Is there a way to practically measure or quantify happiness as to say, this is how happy I was yesterday, this is how much I'm today?
So the question is, can you quantify happiness? And there's a huge amount of research, and there's if you go to the MA, what does it stand for? Is it the Masters in Applied Positive Psychology? Or anyway, it's the MAP program at the University of Pennsylvania. They have like 1,000 quizzes and tests that you can take. Yeah, there are. I find them completely annoying, and I did it once and turned on a 1 to 10 scale. I'm a 7 on happiness. Thank you. But I don't find that myself to be helpful to constantly trying to be quantifying. But there's a huge amount of research trying to do that. Yeah.
I'm curious about your advice for giving up sugar.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you a few things I've tried, and you can let me know what works, what doesn't. So
for me, because different things work for different people. Yeah.
Four tendencies. That's a question, or so I'm not sure.
Okay.
But so one thing was I tried to quit cold turkey, like go for 30 days without sugar. I've heard it has a lot of benefits, and then you can stick with it because you realize the benefits. I didn't last past the 3rd day.
You didn't.
Then I tried, so at home, I kept no sugar at home.
Yeah.
That's worked really well for me.
That's the strategy of convenience. Okay, you make it very easy.
That works really well for me. If I have something, I'll have to keep listing it.
Yeah.
And then the other thing was just have, I used to, after I work out, I can treat myself with sugar.
Bad idea. No. Reverse reward, no,
Exactly.
back away, yeah.
And then the third thing was just have 3 bites. And
Moderation, right? This is what a nutritionist will say to you. Have 3 bites, just satisfy that little sweet tooth. You sound like an abstainer, my friend. You got to go off that thing altogether. Okay, well, so I'm 100% abstain. You would not believe what I abstain from. I am like a low-carb fanatic. I mean, really. And so to me, it's so freeing, and it's hard for me. Like, I can't even get my mind around the 3 bites. But you're very smart to make it convenient to stick to it. So there's 21 strategies. One of the most powerful strategies, strategy of convenience, and the corollary, which is the strategy of inconvenience. So you want to make it very inconvenient to eat sugar, and very convenient not to. So cleaning out your house is good. And then bright line rules are often very effective. Like, I'm not going to have, like, my sister is a type 1 diabetic, and she's a TV writer, and you cannot believe the food that they have around TV writers. It's just insane. And so her rule is that it's at work, she's absolutely strict with herself, and then at home, she's much more loose, but at work, she's very strict. So you could try that. As I say, I think that, like, having the 3 bites, like, try it. If it works for you, that's great. If it doesn't work for you, try abstaining. That's much easier. One of the things about cravings is that cravings are more ignited by possibility. They did a fascinating study back when everybody smoked of flight attendants. And what they found is that no matter, like, if they were on a 3-hour flight or an 8-hour flight, their craving for nicotine kicked in like a certain amount of time from landing. It wasn't the time in the body free of nicotine. It was the possibility of having a cigarette. So if you're like, I don't eat that, then that craving just diminishes. So the possibility. And then about having, I'm going to reward myself for, okay. Rewards. The strategy of rewards is one of the most complex and I think misunderstood strategies within habit change, which is how do you deploy rewards to get yourself to stick to a habit? And there's only one way, I think, that it can effectively work. The only reward for a habit that you should give yourself, well, the obvious reward is there's the reward of the habit itself. So one reward is I'm not eating sugar, and so I have all the rewards that flow from eating sugar. But can I give myself an additional reward? The additional reward is anything that logically flows from that. So, like, let's say I was doing a lot of yoga. A reward that would be appropriate would be I'm going to get a new yoga mat. Because a person who does a lot of yoga needs a new yoga mat. Or I've decided that I'm going to bring lunch from home every day. I'm going to reward myself by buying some fancy kitchen knives because a person who's doing a lot of cooking needs kitchen knives. But when you get in, but so often we reach for perverse rewards, which is things like that actually counteract any benefit that we would get. Oh, I'm going to go for a run, so I'm going to give myself a beer. Okay, those are things that are just like this. And what often happens with people, because of the way we are, is that the habit will fall away and you keep the reward because you're like, well, I'm in the habit of having a beer every day when I get home from work. You're like, well, no one can expect me to go for a run today because I hurt my foot. Oh, it's raining so hard, but I still get my beer. It's like, no, yeah, you know what I mean? This is the thinking. And so it's like, the treats. You can say, you know, one of my favorite treats was a guy, a friend of mine. His treat is that when he loves Cinnabon, but you know, it's like dangerous to go there. So his reward is that when he is in the Newark airport, he gets to have Cinnabon. And the fact is, that's okay because he's not going to go out of his way to go to the Newark airport just to get a Cinnabon. If he was saying to himself, every time I run, I get a Cinnabon, that thing could be fired up 7 days a week, you know? And so you want to think very carefully about rewards. And I will say, and I say this as a total low-carb fanatic, and so take it from what it's worth. From my experience, when you give it up altogether, cravings fade, all that noise just goes out of your head. It's just over. And so for me, that works really well. That is not the strategy that works most successfully for other people. Most people do not want to totally eliminate it. And I talk in the book about like how you can sort of eliminate it, but manage it with things like anticipated breaks, like, oh, I'm looking forward to it on Saturday. I'm going to have, or like my friend who went to Montana, he was total low carb like me. But when he went to Montana, there was a famous pie place. So he decided his rule was that he could have pie at every meal. He had 21 pieces of pie in a week, but he never had it with ice cream. He never brought it back to his hotel room. He didn't bring any home with him. He had his pie. He loved having his pie. It was an important part of the vacation for him. And then he came back to his regular life, and it was over. And so but he anticipated, he figured out how he wanted to handle that habit in advance. What you want to avoid is when you're invoking that loophole on the fly. Oh, it's my birthday. Oh, it's specially the house. Oh, it's going to hurt your feelings if I don't order a birthday cake. You know, that kind of thing.
So that's the cheat day strategy.
Oh. Yeah, I would not use it. Well, no, but cheat day, no. Cheat day is like once every 7 days. And to me, if for an abstainer, that is not healthy. You just become too. This is like it's your anniversary. You're in Paris. You know, like okay, tonight. You know, this is your once a year thing. Cheat day starts to be, well, oh yeah, I have my cheat day on Saturday, but then New Year's Eve is Monday. It's kind of the same thing, 2, 3, get out of that, man. That strategy of safeguards. There's a whole of loophole spotting, which is there's 10 categories of loopholes that we were constantly evoking. Like the fake self-actualization loophole. Life's too short not to eat a brownie. But anyway, we got 10 categories of those. You can keep that going all day long. So you want to fight those loopholes. Yeah.
A question for you about the 4 types. So I listened to your podcast where you had the 4 types, and they all called in and left a voicemail of their mantras.
Yes,
their mantras. I noticed that there were no rebels that called.
No. There was an amazing rebel motto.
Which one was that?
It was, you can't make me, and neither can I. No, there were several.
That I didn't pick up on. Is there a cause for rebels to be apathetic? Is there issues where they're non-voters, for example?
That's interesting. I don't.
How do you motivate them? That's the follow-up question.
I think he's talking about a lazy rebel.
Yeah. Well, one of the very important things to point out is that this is one very tiny slice. It's very influential in how you move through the world, but it's a very small aspect. So, take a rebel. A rebel is going to look very different if they're considerate. If you have a loving rebel, that rebel is going to act very differently from a rebel who doesn't really care about other people. Or how smart you are, or how ambitious you are, or how creative you are, or how anxious you are. All these things come into play. And so there can be this gigantic range in how it comes. Now, some rebels are extremely cause-driven, and they can be super powerful because they can break the rules, they can break convention to do what they want. And others, no. So I think that has more to do with the other parts of your personality and how it can come out, because all these tendencies can be very positive and helpful for you and for society, and then there are ways where it can come out where it can be less successful, more destructive. Absolutely. Yeah.
Hi. Huge fan, and I have a question and a plug for a podcast.
Oh.
Need an idea.
Okay.
So I'm an upholder.
Yeah.
I'm also 5 months pregnant.
Okay.
So I have all these beautiful habits.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest things I've heard about parenthood is you just don't know, and you don't know what kind of baby you're gonna get.
Yeah.
But I really want to think about how do I lay habits for continuing exercising and yoga.
Yeah.
So I was curious what you've heard from your parents and what advice you have.
Yeah.
He's doing May, so you have time to write a book about it. So
Yes.
awesome.
I'm working on a book about the 4 tendencies right now. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, see, this is a very upholder question, because upholders are very interested in kind of excellent execution and also in managing themselves to be able to perform. And so the idea, maybe you're not going to be able to go to the gym for 3 months, to an upholder, that's very anxiety producing, because it's I need to be able to stick to my good habits. This is why upholders are often seem rigid to other people, because it's just I need to go. So I would say that you're very wise to anticipate that it's going to be, and this is the strategy of the clean slate, which is that when we go through a major transition, whether it's a new baby, a new relationship, a new job, moving, all our habits are wiped away and new habits come in. And so what you want to do, and it will probably come easily to you as an upholder, is to really think about, I've got this, the baby arrives, everything's changing, how do I want to build in the habits that I want? And to think about it from the beginning, because whatever habits form in the beginning are very likely to persist. You want to start as you would continue. Now, one of the things about a new baby is the sleep deprivation. Your sleep is so disturbed, and so your sleeping has to be the top priority. And so if other things have to, you might in your mind have a set of priorities of what are the most important habits that need to be honored. And so not everything might be able to do right away. Now, I don't know if you know about the 3-month mark, which is everything becomes dramatically easier at 3 months. And so you could even say to yourself, okay, well, I'm going to have 3 months, which is the super newborn stage. And then it's some things I'll worry about once we get to that mark, because then things are going to start getting easier. But it is a big transition. And it does affect a lot of people's habits. They're wiped away, and then they don't always come back in a good way. So that's very smart to think about. Yeah?
I had a clarification. Because at first I pegged myself as a question.
Oh, okay.
Someone came with me It's like you're a rebel.
Ooh.
And then as
Yes.
you went through it, and I think for me, it's just like, I get a lot of stuff done.
Yeah, sure.
Maybe a rebel.
Yeah, you can.
But is the clarification that like, because I do find as soon as there's a rule, I find it like ruins the whole thing.
Yeah, that's
So
right.
that's the difference. Not
Yeah.
that you don't get stuff done.
Okay, not to get too making it sound too complex, but it does. But with a lot of the tendencies, like they overlap with other tendencies, so that you sort of tip to one way or another. So you might be a rebel who sort of tips to questioner, and so it's pretty easy for you to go along with the rule if you're convinced that it makes sense. But your first impulse is still that pushback. Like, I don't want you to tell me what to do. I don't like that it says no cell phones on the wall. Watch me pull out my cell phone and start talking on the phone. You know, but rebels can be super successful and super high performing if that's what they want.
It just seems like it takes like a fun if there's like ritual around the schedule.
That's a very rebel way of thinking. See, because for an upholder, that's not true. No, but and if you and I work together, it would be important for us to recognize that we have this difference. Because I'm like the one like, let's make a sheet of all the top 5 things that we're gonna blah 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 blah, and you'd be like, no, my God, you know, may drive me crazy, you know, like that. I literally had a rebel back away from me one time when she was like, because I said discipline is my freedom, and she was like, freedom means no rules. And I was like, yeah, woo-hoo, we're not talking the same language. Yeah.
Again, you said people mentioned things that they wanted to achieve, and you said, I saw habits as kind of the core thing.
Yeah.
Have you found anything that's kind of before habits? Like, for example, I'm thinking of like maybe beliefs, for example. Like,
for example, what?
Maybe like beliefs that make up habits, for example. Like maybe a rebel says, I want to be a rebel for this, but maybe they believe in freedom as an absolute thing, freedom from themselves and freedom from other people.
Yeah.
Is there something before habits that explains?
You know, I never thought about that. That's an interesting question. You know, it's an interesting question too of how much of our beliefs flow from our nature and how much is our nature shaped by our beliefs. In my own mind, haven't really decided what I think about that. Are my values, am I an upholder because those are the values I have, or do the values make me an upholder? I don't think so. So I don't know. That's a very good question. That's interesting. Yeah.
Shown on hypnosis and habit making.
Interesting. I tried that for the Happiness Project. I tried hypnosis because I thought, well, this is going to be like the easy shortcut, right? Like, I'm just going to hypnotize myself into perfection. I did not find that it worked. And basically, the way that I had tried hypnosis, it was like basically about like, what do they call that? It wasn't like a passive thing. It was like I had to sit there and constantly be mindfully, you know, picturing what I was doing. I'm like, this is way too much work. I mean, this is just like basically focused attention. Image, I forget the name of it. There's a word for that. And so then I had this experience and I sort of dropped it. So I haven't done any further research on that. Like anything, there's probably people who do it very well and it's very successful. But for me, it did not work. Yeah.
Can you give some examples of healthy treat habits?
Oh, healthy treats? Mm-hmm. Yeah, like buying yourself new music, learning a magic trick. Going for a walk with your dog. But see, like for some people, going for a walk with their dog would be something they would have to force themselves to do. You know what I mean? So it all depends on you. A huge craze now, adult coloring books, right? Okay, that's a good treat. Like your favorite show. Like maybe you're going to keep your show and not watch it, but keep it as like a treat. So you're like, if I need a little treat, I'm going to watch The Office rerun. You know what I mean? Because I need a little treat. And so sometimes you have to hold something back so that it feels like a treat. Like if you said to yourself, I'm only going to have coffee as a treat, then it would start feeling more like a treat. Or you could just have it be part of your everyday life. I am super obsessed with perfume, and I have a perfume that I love. And I only, like, this is what I need, a big treat. You know, like I'm feeling very sorry for myself or I'm feeling very anxious about something. I'm like, I get to wear that perfume. You know, I save it as a treat. So it's really independent, but you want to have a lot of those in your back pocket. One more question. Okay. Yeah.
You mentioned a strategy for obligors to map their external to internal to get healthier habits. But what about for questioners? It doesn't seem to work the other way.
Yeah. So for questioners are, their value is reasons and justifications. So when a questioner is having trouble sticking to a habit, it's usually because really deep down, they don't see the value of it. And this is really important because in many situations, we might want people to form a habit, but they aren't really convinced. And so they're not going to be compliant. So if I said to you, well, I need to have that by Friday, but you know I don't really need it till Monday, you're not going to give it to me till Friday. So if I wanted to get it by Friday, I would have to say to you, I need this by Friday because I'm going to be flying on Saturday and I want to read it on the plane. Okay, I can give it to you by Friday if there's a reason. Or I was at the dentist and the dentist said, you need to brush your teeth for 2 minutes, and we said, or you're going to get tartar. Well, that sounds like a reason, right? But it's not really a reason. Why do I care if I have tartar? Right? So she wasn't really giving me a reason. She needed to say, because you're going to have tartar, and if you have tartar, oh, well, I don't even know, because she didn't tell me what's going to happen with tartar. But I'm going to uphold her, right? But so you need to really, and often when questioners say that they're having trouble sticking to something, if you press them, they will say, well, I don't really believe it. Like I had a friend say to me, oh, I spent all this money buying all these vitamins and supplements, but I never take them. And I was like, well, do you think you need to take them? He said, oh, no, I don't think so. So that's why he didn't take them. You know, I don't know why he bought them, but that's why he didn't take them. But I was like, wow, if you were a type 1 diabetic taking insulin, I bet you would take it, because that you need it. And so always you go to the justifications and the rationale, and that can mean lots of research, because they have to get to that place of understanding this is why this is important for me. Because once they buy in, then they can do it. So thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for having me. It's so much fun.